Hello and welcome to Book Lovers Companion, the podcast about books, authors, their craft and more. My name is Edith, and joining me for today's episode is returning guest and by now regular on the show, Daniel Bautz. Hello Daniel and welcome back on the show. It's lovely.
How are you doing today, Edith?
Quite good, and as you can see, the wool jumper season has officially started over here.
Full Halloween, yeah. Shirt.
You are dressed for Halloween.
Yeah.
I can see that. And it stays also on topic with your books, one could fairly say.
Pretty much, yeah. I can't not do spooky.
Well, good for us and good for you. And you have been very busy since our last conversation, haven't you?
I try to always stay busy, always be writing. That's my motto. I want to be. I've only got so many years left on this planet, and I want to get as many stories out as I can.
Yeah, but not just, as far as I can tell, not just writing. You've also been busy promoting your books.
Promoting my books, doing everything I can to get them out there. I've been traveling a lot. I've been all over the state of Ohio. I've been to probably 15 or 20 shows this year, and that's not slowing down anytime soon. So the only way to get the word out there for an independent author is to get out there and meet people face to face.
Yep, you're so right. That's the hard part. Is it the harder part than writing? Harder than writing?
No, but it doesn't leave as much time for writing, I guess, would be the thing that I would say is a drawback to that.
Yeah. And like I said, you have been busy writing, and you have published a novel for adults, and you have also published book number 2 in your Aristotle James series.
It's not out yet. It'll be coming out shortly. So I don't have a definitive date. So I'm waiting to hear that. It was supposed to come out October 10th, but pushed back. So no big deal. Everything happens for a reason. So I'm going to ride with it. And I mean, the book is done, so I don't have to worry about that. It's just getting it back out there so the public can read book 2.
Oh yes. I'm sure your fans can't wait to get their hands on book number 2.
I hope so.
I'm convinced of that. And like I said, there's also a adult book. It's called Burn Out the Day. It's a suspense, a paranormal thriller. And Daniel, my question is, of course, what can you tell our readers about this book?
This book, I mean, I was excited to put it out there. The idea came to me, and I was like, actually came to me before I was even writing. I used to host a podcast / late night radio show. It was called The Grand Dark Conspiracy, and I had a guest on, and he made this kind of offhand comment, and it just created this thing in my head that just wouldn't go away, this little nagging voice. He made a comment that if ghosts are real and they're creating cold spots, then they must be creating a hot spot somewhere else. And then if they're doing that, that's creating free energy, and someone should harness that and create free energy. It's more important than just understanding that if ghosts exist, they exist. It's like, if they exist in such a way, it's creating free energy. So that just kind of stuck with me. And like 10, 12 years later, I had this idea for the story Burn Out the Day, and it just, that's kind of what that little one-off sentence turned into. And I actually used it in the foreword of the book, the actual quote from the Dr. Barry Taff. So that's where the kernel of the idea came from for this one. And I wanted to kind of step out of the past and step into the present and present a different type of story than what I've been writing.
Oh, And you have some interesting characters in your book as well. And it's also called the subtitle, A Winter Walker Thriller. So this character, Winter Walker, describe him to us.
So Winter Walker is a genius. He's an engineer that has created a device that captures endothermic energy and allows you to kind of harness that into power. And he's a grieving father. He lost his daughter, who was a paranormal researcher, got killed while paranormal researching by someone claiming that she was trespassing. And that's kind of the crux of the whole story. Like you pick up, he's all alone now. He's off his course and he's kind of adrift in a world trying to deal with his grief, deal with a world where he doesn't have his wife and his daughter in it any longer. And he's just left alone in this big house with all this success, and it doesn't mean anything to him. And one day he's having his coffee. He reads a newspaper report about a year later, almost identical situation. Another paranormal investigator is killed, and it just triggers something in him that he needs to go look into them for himself, because the story that he was fed now seems more fishy.
So Winter Walker joins forces with a young woman called Erin, who's also a hunter of the supernatural, the paranormal.
So I figured that to me, Erin, the idea came to me is, and this is going to sound really weird, and that like basically the four corners of the earth come together to join against a power that is looking to overcome the earth. And that was like also a little kind of kernel of the story. So I was trying to bring people from different aspects of life together in a way that maybe necessarily they wouldn't. But she is also Winter's connection to his daughter, and the pursuit of the paranormal is because his daughter that was killed was a fan of this YouTuber, Erin, and she gets pulled into it because the second victim, is her sister.
Yeah.
And so that's how they
Sorry,
end up
Daniel.
connecting.
I just have to again. So Erin, the hunter of the paranormal.
Yeah, I mean, she basically she's a paranormal investigator that is also a social media phenomenon, YouTuber, successful in that regards and very popular. Her sister is the person that gets killed that brings Winter Walker out of his funk to investigate what's actually happening, because it just seemed too suspicious to him. Two similar deaths, and reported the same way, and handled the same way by the police, and the official story just seemed too fishy to him. So he starts to look into what's actually happening, or what could be actually happening, why this is suspicious to him.
And you also have this third party involved in your book, which brings the thriller element into the book. And shall we call it greedy corporate America in a way?
In a way, it absolutely is. And it's like one of the things with writing it was kind of fun to kind of delve into that world a little bit, and to think how you would have to think to function that way. Profits over, what's right necessarily. I mean, the thought of how they're creating their power company is really just, I would say it's kind of disturbing, and just the ethics of that is kind of questionable to begin with. Assuming that ghosts are the souls of human people, and using the powers that they do to using the power that they have to manifest, and trapping them, and creating them, basically turning them into batteries to turn on lights. There's a real ethical question that needs to be asked there. Is this something that, like, even if it's possible to do, that ethically you should do it, because you're dealing with human souls and using them, exploiting them without their consent to watch TV shows or to charge your cell phone or your car. So there's a whole other aspect to it that I thought was kind of fun to address, and what kind of ruthless people or how people would deal with that question themselves to make it all right for themselves to chase after that.
And telling you or hearing you say what the idea is behind chasing those souls and capturing those souls, powering your cell phone and maybe even your car, makes me think of one certain owner of a social media platform, combined with other people. I mean, there's a bit of Elon there, isn't there? Maybe.
I mean, I think there's a bit of any kind of person that's a magnate that will put profit in front of basically morality, for lack of a better term, or ethics, however you want to say it. Like where they can say that the ends justify the means because they're at the end of the rainbow with their pot of gold.
Yeah. But I got the impression that that's not everything there is. What this corporate leader is after. There's more to the story.
There is much more to the story. I mean, when you start to dig into like who the people are, who the power movers are, I think that was one of the things that even shocked me as I was writing it. Was we all have this idea of the people up at the top of the food chain economically and how they view the world. And you hear things thrown around like Illuminati and all that, like people that are like the ruling class, for lack of a better term. And you do see it somewhat play out in the real world, without getting too conspiratorial. But there's people like George Soros, the Bill Gates, the people that are up at the top. There's a ripple effect from what happens from the top down to the bottom. But I would think for people to control us, to be a cabal, is not necessarily them with the intention of controlling ourselves, controlling us. It's not necessarily that it would be more like they're trying to enact their will on the world, and whether or not it affects us or how it affects us is of no concern to them. And you would have to do that not out in the public eye. You would have to do that behind the scenes, and you wouldn't be the publicity seekers. You would be the prime mover that the people that we do see are just a step below.
Probably, you're right. And it also makes you question what motivates people who work for them. For example, the henchman that is always mentioned in your book, Pat, with his past. And is it really just money he's after? You get the impression that it's just money. It's money really that one motivator that lets you do things like what he does?
So I think Pat's motivation is to have the financial freedom. Money is part of it, but it's more like to have the financial freedom to be able to disconnect and not have to engage any longer. I think there is when you look at the kind of the corporate greed that we're talking about, there's a sickness that underlies that. Like, how much is enough? For Pat, there isn't enough, but he's just not there yet, and he's working towards that because he just wants to be done and he wants to be out. I mean, and he doesn't care how he gets there, because he's been made into a certain type of person where he takes orders, he does what's necessary, and anything outside of that is hard for him to deal with.
Yeah, that's true. That's absolutely true. And what about the physicist that started or was one of the starters of this whole enterprise? Because his idea to harvest energy, to have a more or less endless supply of energy, he also comes across as a rather ruthless individual.
I think he becomes that. I think I started off. I think I tried, and you tell me if I was successful or not. But I kind of wanted him to have an arc to where, like, he starts off, he's not necessarily that. He just wants. He's so driven to get his idea out there.
Mm.
And once he starts to see the success of it, and once he starts to see that bank account grow, and once he starts to see what he's basically being mentored by Erasmus Hawthorne, which is the magnet that he's kind of linked up with as a angel investor or a demon investor, however you want to look at it, to kind of push his idea out there and to test it. So I tried to write so he would have an arc. He's the aloof. All he really cares about is proving his theory. But like once that becomes proven, like where do you take that from there? And I think he's linked up with the wrong people, and he begins to see the value, or I don't say, or see the value. Imagine that there's value in what he's being given by the Erasmus Hawthorne, who is becomes his mentor, and he kind of starts to lose his humanity and becomes ruthless along the way.
And you mentioned the name of our villain number one in your book. What gave you the idea for the name of your villain?
So I mean, Erasmus Hawthorne. I mean, it's a nod to Nathaniel Hawthorne, who I'm a huge fan of. The House of the Seven Gables, Young Goodman Brown, or some for me, those are seminal stories that I read as a youth that kind of carry over into me, that kind of drive for wealth leading to madness and the loss of humanity, were themes that Nathaniel Hawthorne used along the way. Erasmus is actually a nod to a character from a really low budget B movie that I made with my brother and two friends. It's a proud accomplishment and a brave embarrassment. It's horrible, but I'm still proud to have brought it all the way from into the world. But that was one of the main characters in it. So I just and he was a real heel and cad, and then I just kind of took that name and put those two things together, because in a way, the Dr. Edwin Ballou represents young Goodman Brown traveling through the woods, and Erasmus Hawthorne is the guy standing there ready to offer him a deal.
Okay. Well, a great temptation then.
Yes, exactly. Faustian in a way.
Yeah. I see. Absolutely. I understand. And I also think that the end of the book, my dear Daniel. So
what?
I mean, now you have, of course, to tell us, when will we be able to read the next part?
I am hoping that comes out in 2026.
Okay.
That's my legitimate hope. So I've got several things in the works, as you know, like you've kind of mentioned at the top. I'm busy, and I'm always writing. I want to get book 2 and book of Life is in the Blood out next year, hopefully sometime. And also I want to get book 3 of Aristotle James out the following year. And so probably summer of 2026, book 2 of Winter Walker will come out. So we get to see, I know this is like the most egregious cliffhanger that I've ever written, because and even as writing it, I was like, so when I write, I write, I serve the story, and I'm at like I want to say this is a shorter novel. You should have read
Mm,
pretty quickly. I want to say it's like 65, 70,000 words
mm,
or 250 pages. But the problem was if I didn't stop it at that point, and I kind of had the three act
mm,
structure set up.
mhm,
I had that, so I had somewhat of a complete story at that point. If I had continued on, the book would have been 120, 140, 150,000 words, and I was like, just to get to like part two. So I didn't want to put out like a 250,000 word book. Um, so I figured, well, let's split this into three, so it's a little bit more
mhm,
manageable for a publisher to deal with, and that gives the publisher a series as opposed to
mm.
like a one-off book.
Okay, but still, I mean,
It is.
why?
I
Oh
know
my.
this is like the worst cliffhanger because I think I introduced the character kind of in the third act and then put them in peril, and I also dropped kind of a big bomb at the end of that too, for Winter Walker and what it means for
Mm.
the crew that thought that they were like had done their part and were apart.
Yes, yes, and leaving us readers hanging there. What? Oh,
That's
what has he
good.
done? And now we have to wait, have to be patient. Oh dear.
Yeah, yeah, but
Yeah, I know, I know, I know. I do understand. I do understand, but but you just mentioned Aristotle James. So that's another thing I wanted to talk to you about. I mean, we had you on the show for book number 1, and it was lovely. Book number 2 is also lovely. What can you tell our listeners if they haven't listened to the episode before about this character of Aristotle James? It's a book for young adults, children.
young adults, children. But I
Children.
find, I mean, when I go out in the shows and do shows, it's definitely easily my number one seller.
Mm, okay.
And it's a lot of adults. The feedback I get
Mm,
is like the adults, they buy it for a kid, but then they read it and they're
mm,
like they can't wait for book two. So I mean, and let's be honest, like everyone says Harry Potter is for kids, and but all the adults read it too. A good book is a good book,
mhm,
but this is definitely kid appropriate. I think it
mhm.
does deal with some kind of heavier subjects, but in a way that I think is
Yeah.
not too heavy handed or too traumatizing. Aristotle James is about a little boy and his dog, and he gets broiled up and finds out that there's an invisible world out there that affects the world that we live in. And because he's aware of it, he feels responsible for helping people when that invisible world affects the people around him in a negative fashion. So that's, in a nutshell, that's kind of what
Mm,
Aristotle James is. It's a boy and his dog, and they're trying to help people.
mm. And they do it in a very lovely manner. And yeah, and like you said, even for us adults, we enjoy reading those kind of books. I mean, we also get something. It's not just for children to get something out of these kind of books. Like you said, it's although what you deal with in the book or what he has to deal with in the book is not easy stuff. But you write it in a way I absolutely agree that it's people or children can deal with it, can understand what is going on and what is happening. It's not too heavy handed, but not just, placé
Yeah.
either. And that's a very great balance you have in the book for dealing with this subject.
Yeah. I mean, I mean, the first book I thought kind of set up the book two. Book two will probably feel a little bit like a veer left, but then it leads into book three,
Mm,
4, and 5. It's kind of setting up. Um, Sometimes you dip your toe in things and you don't get to walk away from it, even though you
mm,
think you do, or that story's not necessarily over when you think you've closed the chapter.
mm,
Um, Aristotle James and the Waking Wild. It was a rough write for me because
mhm,
I put myself in that situation. You know, in which I tried to kind of write how I would feel in that situation.
mhm, mhm,
And So imagining what
Mm-hmm.
Aristotle goes through was a little bit tough.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so yeah, this book is it's a little bit. I would say it's a little bit more mature than the first one in what it deals with
Mm-hmm.
at its core. But it really is about Aristotle and his father, and how they have a strong relationship,
Mm-hmm.
and what it actually means to a child to have a relationship with their parents that is fruitful.
Mm. So one could say that your character is growing up, and so are the topics or the themes in the book getting more mature.
Yeah, and that was my intention with this series, was that I didn't want it to be a 12-year-old
Mm.
Aristotle, doing 500 adventures. It was Aristotle growing up, experiencing,
Mm.
the world, and trying to make the right choices, trying
Yeah.
to grow into a man who, so it is going to follow him as he gets older, and the situations they're going to age with
Mm-hmm.
them.
Yeah.
He's going to be, when, 15, it's going to be 15-year-old problems and not 12-year-old
Yeah.
problems, and so forth and so on.
Mm. Did you find that exceptionally hard, or was it easy for you? Like you said, you tried to step into his shoes, or think of how would you feel in his situation.
It was very hard. It was a very emotional story for me. It was hard a hard story for me to tell.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not gonna lie. I think first draft, I remember reading it and I was like, man, I have to lighten this up a bit, because it got a little too heavy. And I did. I went back and I lightened it up some, actually significantly. And I did some things where I, initially, the book ended, and you've read it, so, and I'm not trying to spoil anything, but the book ended uh, with AJ and Aristotle hugging. I don't know if you remember that scene,
Mm.
where it's after everything, after he's been through everything, and he's
Mm.
hugging AJ. That's where the book ended, and then going back, and the feedback I got was that people didn't like it, and then going back and
Mm.
reading it after getting the feedback, I was like, yeah, we need to add something here. We can't leave this here. That's too much.
Mm.
So let's go ahead and start into where book 3 is going to pick
Mm-hmm.
up from. So I took parts of what I was planning for
Mm.
book 3 and just continued the story there. So hopefully people won't be left too down when they read it.
And not just doom and gloom, also a hopeful and lighter note.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm. Understandable on one hand, but otherwise, life is not always like that, is it?
No, life can be really rough. I mean, and kids, and that's the thing that we as adults think that kids don't have to deal with that stuff, but they really do. And
Yeah.
so to write something like this, if it helps a kid, I mean, and that's, in my head, that's kind of lofty, but if they can see something in that, see that somebody else has gone through it, and see that there is kind of a continuation, there's
Mm.
a light at the end of the tunnel, hopefully that gives them hope.
Mm. One of my guests asks, she's interested in the question of how much of yourself, if at all, do you put or are in your characters, not just, in a are you conscious of the fact, or is it a fact that you put a little bit of yourself in one of your characters or in more than one of your characters? What about young adult books?
I mean, Aristotle James is very much who I am. It's very much. It is fictionally autobiographical, is how I like to say it. It's a fictionalized account, and some of the stuff I do pull directly from my own life. I mean, going up to Michigan and camping, with my dad. That is something I have done several times and used to do on an annual basis. So like all the places in the book are real places that I've been to with my father. And you know, that whole tradition of getting in the old yellow Dodge pickup that was called Old Yeller. That's my dad's old Dodge pickup that he called Old Yeller. AJ was a real dog that I had years ago. So, I mean, that was the whole inspiration for me to write this book. Was I missed that dog incredibly. I missed that dog so much, and I was just like, I want to spend time with him again. Let's go ahead and how can I spend time with him again, at least in a sideways way? And that's kind of how I did it. And so Aristotle is very much autobiographical. Obviously it's not, and obviously I'm not out there fighting ghosts and witches and other creatures in the woods, but but at the same time, it's a lot of that is pulled from my own path, which is also why it's set in the 1980s, because that's when I grew up, so I can put myself back in that kid's mindset in the 1980s.
The best time, Gen X. I
mean,
it just absolutely agree. Same here. Well,
yeah.
And only recently, I think it was yesterday, one of my students said, "Oh, they were playing some music," and I said, "Oh, I mean, I was your age when this song was a hit," and he said, "Yeah, well, the music of the 80s is better than what we have now."
That is a fact.
Yes, I also agreed. I said, "Yes, that's so very true."
And in a way, I feel like so lucky to have grown up when I in the 1980s and into the 90s.
Yeah.
We had like the best of what was coming, and we had the best of what had already come. Like, and in a lot of ways. And I feel like the youth of today kind of gets short thrift in how the world they have to deal with. Like, we didn't grow up with social media, so we didn't have to worry about the things that we do and they end up being broadcast to the world. We didn't have to worry about having to present ourselves a certain way 24 hours a day. And
true.
And we didn't have helicopter parents.
No,
so
thank goodness.
We had a certain level of freedom that they don't get to enjoy. So, I mean, not that the kids today are bad or anything. I see a lot of them out playing. I see them socializing, and the cell phones aren't the number one thing. I know that's the how people view the generation that's coming up now, but it's really not the case. They socialize. They value that probably more than maybe even we did, because they've been forced to do so much virtual.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'm also glad that we didn't grow up with mobile phones, although we use it every day.
I'm not saying I don't want a cell phone. I'm just saying, like, I'm just happy I didn't have it growing up. Yeah.
Yep, I absolutely agree. I'm so with you on this. And going back a bit further in time, you also mentioned what I also am waiting for. Book number 2 of Life is in the Blood.
So, I mean, it's coming. I have a working title. I've got a working premise. And I've started the drafting. So I'm hoping that summer 2025. I think next summer, and then Winter Walker Book 2 is the following summer. So I'll alternate between the two. I'm going to be calling the series of Life is in the Blood the Black Cathedral Covenant, and it's going to the world's going to grow. I mean, you're still going to have your 3 main protagonists, and them finding a much bigger world opening up to them because they've kind of been baptized in this world that they didn't realize existed.
Yes, and what I so loved about your book was your absolutely fantastic female character.
I love to hear that because it's like one of those things, you hear so much about that in the literary world, men writing women, women writing men, and that whole thing. And like, I'm happy to hear that I did it well, because that's always a concern. It's always a concern. Is this reading true? Because, I mean, I've never lived that experience.
Yeah, well, neither did I. So, I mean, the same could be said for me. I mean, I know what you mean when you said men writing women and vice versa. But you are writing about a woman who lived in the 19th century, who is or was Amish and whatnot. And that isn't my experience either. So it could be also said about me, okay, I'm female. That doesn't mean I know what her experience was. I'm not Amish. I'm not American. And I'm not living in the 19th century. So,
Yeah, I get that. I guess to me, it's like it just a read true. And I think that's the struggle that I was concerned about. Like, I was very excited that not just you, but other people found her to be a believable character and a likable character. Because that's one of the things I really struggle and fight to do, is to write even like the small characters as real people. I try to put myself in their perspective, and then write from that mindset, what they would be thinking, not necessarily what serves the story. Which is, I'm not a pure plotter. I'm not a pure pantser, because I want those characters to kind of lead the story, and character is the basis for any story that's going to connect to people, in my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely.
So yeah, Miriam, I really liked her character, and I think her arc in Life is in the Blood was, I really, she didn't have like a true arc. She had a questioning, and just, well, anyway, I don't want to get too deep into that, but she was an interesting character to write.
Absolutely. And I absolutely enjoyed your book. But like I said, I mean, her character, you did it splendidly.
Thank you so much. That means the world to me to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. I loved her. I loved her character and what you did to her, did to her, I mean, she grows. I mean, you follow her story, and she grows through the story, and that's what I love about books. And when it's done so well, like you did, to show how a question becomes more nagging, and how am I going to solve that? What are my choices? Do I have choices? And what happens if I make the wrong choice? Is it the wrong choice? Is it the right choice? All those questions, and then stand firm, which she does, and how she realizes herself, as the story continues and develops, how strong she really is. And that was lovely to see and great to see.
Yeah, and if I know you've read it, so like one of the things I thought was fun about it is like, she has her moment of weakness, but then it turns into her strength. And because of that, she's changed, but she's not changed as much as the other characters who never, they just were kind of single-minded, and they weren't searching for their souls. They were just searching for a completion of a quest. And I don't know. I like where all three of the main characters ended up at the end of the story. All changed somehow.
I mean, is it really, when you compare writing a male character to a female character, is it really that much harder writing a female character because she's female? Or do you think it has also something to do with the fact that you have set it in a long bygone time? Unlike, let's say, for example, Erin in your new book.
Yeah. I think what it is I think we're all human, and I think this is one of the gifts of being a writer is that you get to put yourself in other people's mindsets. And I think when we start to limit or try to tell people they can't do certain types of characters and stuff like that because they're not that character, they're not representative of that character, that I think you actually do more harm than good by doing that. Like, because then you're stopping people from trying to empathize and to understand how other people function. So, when I write a character, I do like flesh them out. I do write like their background. I do all that like kind of background. So like taking Miriam, she's questioning, she's naive, she's coming from a world where she's been held back from thinking freely. When I took Erin, she's more of a confident person, and she's been out there. She's a problem solver. Doesn't like to. She's a different character altogether. Yeah. She's already has that self confidence that Miriam was searching for.
Yeah.
And she's super intelligent, and she's super engaging, and she knows how to play the game, and thinks, and is a person that is going to look for answers rather than wait for answers to come to her. So they're very different characters. I hope they both read like as three-dimensional. Again, that was my intention.
Yeah, absolutely.
And but Miriam, I don't think it was any easier. I think it's easier to write a character that is seeking than it is to write a character that's already found who they are. And then to kind of illustrate the change over the course of the story. Because even if you found who you are, when you go on an adventure, you're going to change along the way, unless you're Pat.
Yeah. Yeah, I do understand. And it is not always a question of age, is it? Because sometimes you have people who are older and still, when they are confronted with certain realities, they realize I haven't known who I am. I thought I knew who I am, but then it turns out I didn't at all.
I think that's very true. I mean, I think when you're confronted by challenges, those are the times that you answer for yourself who you are. And I mean, as a writer, writing any drama, it doesn't really matter what it is, you're presenting these characters at a point in their story where they are confronted with a challenge. So either how they react to that challenge is going to paint how that character changes. To a large degree. So I think that's a very true thing. It doesn't matter necessarily where you are along the road. Like when you're presented with a new challenge, you've never faced it before. You don't know how you're going to react until you're in the midst of it. And so that is very true. That's how we all grow. That's how we all learn that, who we are.
Yeah, absolutely true. And it's something that's this certainty, that's something for young people, I think, because it's something I always encounter with young, I don't know, students who say, yeah, I would have done that and this and that, given the history of Germany and Austria. And I always say, I don't know. I can honestly say, I don't know how I would have reacted and what I would have done.
That's the honest answer. Like we all see in hindsight, like what looks to be evil, but when you're in the midst of it, are you going to recognize it? I mean, because it's really hard to swim against the stream.
Yeah.
And what you're presented is not always going to be the truth. Sometimes the crowd is going in the wrong direction, and you should be wading against that current.
Yeah.
So it's hard to say, like, I mean, that's a prime example of what you just said is a prime example. Everybody looks back and goes, well, for sure I wouldn't have, put on the red armband. But you really can't say that. And maybe, a lot of those people at that time said that, but then the lives of their loved ones were at risk
Yeah.
if they didn't. So it's like it's a real so sometimes you're presented with a Sophie's choice, or it's the maiden or the tiger behind the door. You
Yeah.
don't know until you open that door.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's also what makes books so interesting. When you, as a reader, you think, oh dear God, what has the author done to that poor character? But that's what keeps us reading. That what keeps us
Yeah,
hooked, and putting your characters through an ordeal and see how they come out of it. Do they break, or do they survive and grow?
yeah, yeah. I mean, and I don't know if I've written a character that's broke yet. So now I'm gonna have to try and figure out a way to work that in, like where they're not strong, they don't stand up, they're trying to be an oak, but then they break instead of trying to be a willow.
Yeah,
Hmm.
that's also interesting. But maybe there's someone there who helps them become whole again.
That's true. I mean, that's a good point. I mean, when you meet Winter Walker, he's pretty much broken.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Hmm.
And what happens when you put them through all kinds of, I don't know, hardships? Do they break completely, or do they keep a teeny tiny bit of strength buried deep inside them?
And do they reconnect with that strength
Yes,
again?
yes, exactly.
Do they find
Yeah,
that hope
yeah,
and that power to move forward?
yeah. And what does it take for them to recover their teeny tiny kernel of strength inside of them?
Hmm.
That, I think that's always an interesting question. And there's also the question of, how are we shaped by outer forces? Like you said, in Miriam's case, the community she grew up in. Also in Erin's case, how she grew up with modern technology and the demands of modern
Yeah.
technology, not by a small community like Miriam's, but the larger community that does shape us and does change us in a way.
It's true. Like, I mean, that's the, the outer forces are always pressing on you
Yeah.
like I said, the mob is always pushing on you. Do you go upstream, or do you just follow the stream
Yeah.
to where it leads you? And that it's that pressure that forms everybody, and everybody reacts differently to it, which is what I think as a writer is awesome, because that means you have an infinite number of routes to go for any given character, and there
Mhm.
really is no wrong way to take them. I
Yeah.
mean, it's like the two characters in Winter Walker. You've got Vern,
Mhm.
who's former military, former infantry, and then you got Pat, who's former
Yeah.
military, former special ops. Two very different people, two very different paths,
Yeah.
and how they, even though they had that kind of same background, why is it that they ended up in different streams?
Yeah. True. Yeah. That's the interesting question. And you wonder about them as characters, as persons, about their personality and what makes them tick the whole time. And you ask yourself, is this character, Pat, for example, is he never questioning his motives, his actions, and is it all about having enough money to retire and sitting on his boat and what, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's with him. It's that dealing with the lie you tell yourself to justify what you're doing.
Mm,
Uh, yeah, I'm just in this. I just want to get away from it, but you're still in it. Like,
yeah.
I know I mentioned, like, once he's like, well, I should have enough, but I want to make sure I have
Mm,
enough, rather than just pulling himself and out of the situation, and not having to elevate the stakes for himself. And but yet he still just keeps. So there's something more than just
yeah.
necessarily oh, I want money. There's something more to it. There's a sickness in him as well.
Yeah.
That drives him to do pretty dastardly things. I would say he's one of the nastier characters I've ever written.
He might even enjoy what he does.
I say he kind of does. I mean, I think I hinted that at the very start of the book that he actually kind of does.
So it's not just all about the money.
No, it's not. He enjoys the perks of the job, so to speak.
Yeah, I'm afraid so. Daniel, is there anything else you would like our listeners to know?
No, I mean, if you want to go check out my books, they're available on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, any place really that you're going to find books online. Or you can go to danielbautzctp.com or danielbautz.com and find them there. You can follow me on Instagram. That's my number one mode of social media. So I'm always posting about where I'm going to be, what's happening. And I love to hear from you. So it's at @dbautzzy on Instagram. Other than that,
look out for the books. Yes, look out for the books. And you will have a great time reading them, dear listeners. Daniel, it was a pleasure talking to you. Please wait for me in the green room. I will be with you shortly.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Edith.
Dear listeners, I do hope you enjoyed this episode as much as my guest and I did. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. And I hope you will be back for another episode. Until next time.